Human beings have been telling stories for millennia. However, it is one skill which lacks in so many leaders out there. The power of stories can help inspire, motivate, and instill lessons that we want to have within our organizations. Yet so many leaders simply just suck at this skill. Today, my guest, Tom Henschel, and I discuss topics such as why perception is so important to leaders, why storytelling is such a powerful tool, how leaders can improve their storytelling skills, amongst many other topics. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Moving Forward Leadership Podcast, episode 111, Why Storytelling Matters, with executive coach Tom Henschel. Welcome one, welcome all to the Moving Forward Leadership Podcast. It's your Chief Leadership Officer, Scott McCarthy, and welcome to you, the hungry leader, the leader who wants to learn more, to develop themselves more, to simply become a great leader and not that boss. And you're here because here at Moving Forward Leadership, we develop you in 3 domains of leadership: leading yourself, leading your team, and leading your organization. And today, we're going to be hitting on leading yourself and leading your teams with how you can tell better stories and, most importantly, why it matters in the first place. So welcome. It's great to have you here. It's great to have you back. I'm excited because, let me tell you, we have a rock star guest today. And I know I often say that because, well, frankly, they all are. But seriously, Tom is a rock star guest because not only is he just an executive coach, he's also another leadership podcaster, one who I've personally been listening to for quite some time. And I would say, next to the Moving Forward Leadership Podcast, he's one of the top shows out there. So Tom is a great speaker and has a lot of knowledge and a lot of different views that makes this a great show today. So a little bit about him. He's an expert in workplace communications and executive development. And that's mainly because, he's an executive coach. That's who he works with day in, day out. He's also the president of executive development firm Essential Communications and a founding coach at consulting firm Corporate Coaching International. He's a senior coach with Area Consulting, Aiden Coaching, and Executive Coaching Connections. The guy is busy, and if that wasn't enough, he also volunteers coaching emerging female leaders for the Coaching Fellowship, serves on the advisory board of the Actors Fund, and on the board of directors of Children's Community School. The guy is busy, but you know what? He took time out of his crazy busy schedule to come talk to me, most importantly, share his wisdom for you, the leader who wants to better themselves and not be that horrible boss that none of us really want to be. So that's Tom. That's our guest today. And you know what, folks? No need to drag this out. So why don't you sit back, relax, and enjoy my interview with Tom Henschel on why storytelling matters. Tom Henschel, welcome to the Moving Forward Leadership Podcast. It's great to finally get you here.
Thanks. It's great to finally be here.
We're just talking before I hit record. I've actually been a long-time listener of your show, and I wouldn't say I want to go to the point of dream guests come on the show, but still, you're definitely high on the list. And when I saw your application to come on the show come across my email, I was just like, oh yes, Tom is definitely coming on the show without any questions, without any pre-interviews, nothing. And finally, here
glad.
you are.
Great. I'm so glad.
So I got a question for you. How does one go from being an actor to an executive coach? Because those two things don't really line up that great.
No,
right?
They really don't. And I haven't found many of people like me. I've a couple, but not many. I think the through line for me is teaching. So this is really weird. When I was in high school, I actually taught junior high school. When I was in college in the summers, I used to teach at another university in the summers. And then when I came out to Los Angeles, I was teaching at a conservatory. Now, this was all about theater and acting and Shakespeare and stuff, but teaching really spoke to me. So when I saw that my television career was going to end at some point and was not going to sustain me into my 60s, and I was looking for another career, I thought I was going to be a teacher at university. And I taught for a couple semesters. And I got to just tell you, Scott, it was such a bad fit for me. I was so unhappy. It was not a good fit. But I really do like teaching. And I found this thing called corporate training. And having never, ever worked in the corporate setting, I didn't really actually know what it was. But pretty soon I was like, oh, I can do this. And I taught presentation skills for years. And then almost immediately I got asked to coach. It wasn't even called coaching in those days. But so that was the transition. It was me as a teacher following things that I knew.
That's, as you explain it, I can see the linkages here now. But as one would say, actor, executive coach, everybody would just kind of scratch their head like I did. And, you what I would think your pinnacle of being on Matlock. And yes, I actually do remember Matlock.
Yep. Matlock was fun.
Right. And now here you are, you're executive coach. It's pretty impressive, I must say.
Well, when you think too about part of what I'm known for, executive presence, the look and sound of leadership, that all in some ways, goes to personal presentation, which is in some ways, it's what I used to call acting on the corporate stage. That was what I used to talk about a long time ago, acting on the corporate stage. And then I treated it in some ways like, in fact, the very first coaching gig that I ever got, a chairman of the board said, I have 3 division presidents. They are just not presidential. Could you help them? And I heard that, by the way, I was still acting at the time. I heard that as an acting exercise. They're not presidential. Like, sure, I can make people act more presidential. I didn't have any idea what I was doing, but I didn't like cause a car crash. I really actually helped 2 of the guys a lot. And it was behavioral. It was about that concept of acting on a corporate stage.
And I think that kind of the acting, and now something is coming clear in my mind, because you start your show off with talking about the perception of getting leaders to be what they want it to be perceived as. And I was wondering, like, one, where does it come from, which now is starting to come clear. But so I'll ask the question anyway. But 2, why to you is for leaders so important, that whole concept of perception and being perceived as a leader?
Well, I think you can be the smartest guy in the room, but if people don't understand what you're talking about, if people think you're a lightweight, if people don't have, kind of trust in what you're saying, your ideas are not going to fly. You are not going to be influential. Women deal with this all the time, where they'll say something and then suddenly 10 minutes later, a man will say their idea and everybody goes, good idea. Like she didn't speak. That's a perception issue. Right? So this idea of helping people be perceived the way they want to be perceived, I think is really important, so that you can sell your ideas, so you can get traction, so you can get promoted. That's all perception.
So how does a leader go about, pushing for people to perceive them in the way they want to be perceived?
Well, boy, it depends on what you need to develop. So partly I want to say, I hope you're getting good feedback, because the truth is I may need to build up some part of me that I'm not even aware of, that might be sitting in one of my blind spots, and I may not know it. But if I have a good mentor, if I have a good boss, if I get a 360, if I'm getting good feedback, then somebody might say, you've got really, you're hard to understand in meetings because of your voice and your diction and your volume, and your eye contact sucks. So when you talk, people check out. Like, I might not know that, right? So that might be something that people need to work on. It's just totally behavioral. Who knows what people need to work on? It's one of the joys for me, Scott, over the course of my coaching, is I don't ever know what people need to learn, right? I don't know. So when you say, why is it important? Well, for each individual, I think it's different.
Yeah, that makes sense for sure. And I kind of like that whole idea of the feedback, because you don't know what you don't know, right? And until someone tells you, you're not going to know that. And people can think that they're doing a great job, or people understand exactly what they're saying, their subordinates understand, their superiors understand. what they're talking about. If someone doesn't open their mouth, say, boss, or, Joe, what the heck are you saying? What are you trying to say?
I just had an experience where there was an open position they wanted to promote internally. Guy applied and felt pretty certain it was his job. And what everybody else knew was him going through the process was a token. There was no way he was getting that job. And no one had ever told him. And so he went in thinking he was a viable candidate. He was not a viable candidate. And he didn't know. It's like, what a sucky place to be. So there again, he didn't get the feedback. He got the feedback afterwards, by the way. Somebody did him the favor and somebody told him. It was hard for him to hear. But yeah, how important is it for you to be calibrated so you understand how you're coming across?
Well, I like that example because that actually shows more than just that perception and not knowing thing. There's so many other factors that come into play then. Now you're wasting that guy's time going through the whole process. Everybody's like, oh, he's not going to get it. So why are you letting that person go through that process then just to get the end result, which everybody knows? You're wasting the organization's time and resources by putting them through the process. Maybe you're gonna tick them off and they're just going to say, you know what, this is the way this organization thinks of me after all this time. I'm done here. They didn't have the common courtesy to let me know that I have some problems or, weaknesses I need to work on before I can get this promotion.
Absolutely.
There's so many other things at play.
And by the way,
example,
he was not certain he was going to stay after that. He felt betrayed, understandably so, exactly the way you said it. So, but my real point about this is about he could not perceive himself the way others were perceiving him because he had not been given the feedback.
Yeah.
So.
No, it's definitely a powerful tool and a necessary tool for sure. I like that. So we're both podcasters. You have your podcast, which you already mentioned, the Look and Sound Leadership, which I've been listening to for quite a while now. And it just screams to me that you truly believe in the power of storytelling. Because you like, unlike my show where I do interviews or I come on myself and talk about a particular topic, you actually have like a script. And now it's actually clear to me, understanding your acting background, where that comes from. So to you, why is storytelling such a powerful tool? And how can leaders best leverage it to get the most impact?
Wow, two very different questions. So storytelling to me, I live in the world of stories. I mean, I first said I wanted to be an actor when I was 10 years old. So I've always been drawn to stories, whether it's theater, television, film. I believe, here's a good example. There was a story that I used to tell all the time. It was a story about nervousness, and it was about my, quote, sock puppet. And it was a story about my sock puppet. And I told this story for years and years and years, and I told it pretty much the same way all the time. And what happened to me more than once was that years later, people would come up to me and go, oh, I was in your workshop and you told that great story about your puppet. And then they would tell me the story back and it was completely different. What I really believe about story is it doesn't matter what the specifics are. They internalized the story and it helped them and it lived with them. And it was important enough to them to come up to me and say, thank you for that story. I question what piece of data would ever do that. Now, I'm not saying data is not important. Data is important. And I think there are ways to tell data as a story. I'm just saying that I think as human beings, we're wired to take in stories and they live in a different place in our memories, in our brains. And so storytelling, I think, becomes incredibly important. I'll just say one last thing about that, which is I get feedback from my audience all the time. And they tend to say two things about the podcast. They really love how the length of it tends to be about 17 minutes, 18 minutes, whatever. And they say, and the stories help me remember the lessons. So I think over years and years and years, I've just learned people respond to stories. So that's the first answer. The second piece about leaders, listen, I don't think everybody is wired for stories. I don't. I think there's a lot of people who think in data. My sister's a perfect example. My sister thinks in datas facts, numbers. She just does. For her to tell a story is hard, and she's not a great storyteller. And I just can't not tell a story. I mean, just think, we've been talking for, I don't know, 10 minutes? How many stories have I already told?
Yeah.
Right? So I think in stories, and to get leaders to think in terms of story, I teach it. It's something that you can learn, and it's like any other skill. You just need to practice it. But the opportunity for storytelling is everywhere. There's no law. I mean, you've got so many opportunities just over the course of a day that if you're going to go home to your partner and your partner says, "How was your day, honey?" you could tell a story right then. You could tell a story and practice it. So that's my thinking about storytelling. That just gets us started. We could go more if you want.
I definitely would love to. I think it's one, and that's, necessary for leaders to be able to tell stories. But I think it's also most important that leaders understand their audience, right? Just like you said about your sister. A story's not going to resonate with her. So if she's one of my employees, I need to understand that, and understand that if I start telling her a story, it may not resonate with her. But if I had you as an employee, a story would definitely resonate with you, right?
So actually, Scott, I have a different feeling about that, which is I think my sister loves to hear stories. Like whatever it is. She's really devoted to my kids, for example, and she'll call up and ask about my kids. She wants to hear the stories. It's just that she herself is not a storyteller.
Okay, I see the difference you're making. Yeah.
Right. But in terms of as a receiver, listen, what I hear people all the time is say, when we were cavemen, living in caves and around the fire, they would tell the story of the hunt because everybody wanted to know, what happened out there with that bison, right? You would tell the story of the hunt. I think we're all wired to receive stories. I think we are. But I don't think we're all wired to tell stories naturally. I think some people need to learn it like a skill. By the way I've had to learn to work with numbers and data.
Fair point. So if someone's not necessarily a natural storyteller, how do they go about just trying to tell more stories? But that's an obvious, easy way to start being a better one. But how do they go about being a better storyteller? Sometimes you have goals, but you know what? You have a hard time reaching them, and you just can't figure out why. Why is it that you can't achieve those things that you want to achieve? Maybe it's dedication. Maybe it's motivation. Maybe you haven't picked the right goals. So this is where I was not too long ago. And then I realized something. I've been developing the Power Goals program my entire life. And here it is now for you, where you can learn how to pick the right goals, figure out how to achieve those goals, how to stay on track, but most importantly, how to get back on track when you get off. So are you ready? Are ready to up your game and achieve those things that you've been meaning to achieve for so long now? Simply go to movingforleadership.com/power and learn more about the Power Goals program and achieve everything that you've been wanting to achieve. And now, back to the show. How did you go about being a better storyteller?
I think you learn a formula. Like so many things, you just learn a formula. And the formula that I talk about with people is really simple. It's just 3 steps, one of which is, what's the current situation? That's number 1. Number 2 is, what's the obstacle to achieving the goal? Some people in theater and television, they call this the conflict. What's the conflict? What's stopping you? And number 3 is, what's the resolution? And listen, a lot of times in business, the quote-unquote resolution is a proposal, right? Like, hey, look, we really need to hit our numbers in Q2, but we've got this problem and this problem and this problem, so we're proposing that we take this action. Well, suddenly I've just given you an arc that's kind of interesting because we've got this problem and this problem and this problem, and people go, oh, yeah, we do. Like, oh, that's a problem, right? So if you can make the problem important, if you can make the problem live, that's great. Now, one more thing that I'll add. The thing that makes stories sticky, meaning really live in people's memories so they want to repeat them and they have real meaning, is when we as storytellers add the details of what people do, say, and feel. So if I just name the obstacles, we have this problem and this problem and this problem, it's okay. But if I say, look, we actually had a long phone call with our major supplier in Atlanta, and she told us that their customers are blah, blah, blah. Now I'm suddenly telling you what people did, said, or felt, and it's more sticky. Now you can fill it in with imagination, and it becomes important to you too. So you give them the status quo, you give them the obstacle, and you give them a resolution, and you make that a story. I wonder, I don't know. I don't know if that sounds easy, hard. How does that sound?
It makes sense, right? It's a simple formula, and if you think of it, a story is like a show or a movie, right? Yeah, you got the cat, you have the subjects, like you said, the conflict, and then what's the resolution, and that kind of sticks. You asked me about some of my favorite movies. I'll be able to give you a quick 30-second synopsis like that.
Right.
So it does make sense to me.
I want to say if somebody wants to work on their storytelling skills, have them start watching even a 30-minute sitcom, because it's still the same thing. There's a setup, then there's a problem, and then there's a resolution. And if you start watching, you go, oh, I see. Oh, look, they just did that, right? It's in everything. Stories don't work without conflict. So as soon as you start watching for how they introduce the conflict or what the conflict is, it's there all the time.
Now, how would people who are just getting into storytelling sharpen their skills? Should they be practicing in front of the mirror, like the good old the speech technique, or should they like, hey guys, sit around, let me tell you a story, or should they just wait for those times of opportunity to try to meld it into the way they want it to come out? Or is there another way?
Well, I'm a big believer in practice. Again, understand where I came from in terms of what I grew up doing professionally. I grew up in the professional theater, where you're paid for 2, 3, 4 weeks of rehearsal, where you do something over and over and over and over in order to be ready for opening night. And that's how you build mastery. So I'm a big believer in rehearsal. So if I really wanted to build my own storytelling skills, I would, let's say, devote 5 minutes on my drive home every day. I'd put my phone on record, and I would tell a story about the staff meeting that happened at 9:00 this morning. Or I would tell the story of the lunch conversation I had with my direct report, or whatever. But I would say in 5 minutes, I'm going to tell one story about something that happened today. I would talk about the setup. I would talk about the conflict, the resolution, and what people did, said, and felt. And then I would listen to it before I got home, or maybe listen to it tomorrow morning on the way in. And just listen for it as a storytelling thing. Don't get hung up on, oh, I hate my voice and all that. Just listen to it for that one skill.
Right.
And if you did that every day for 10 days, wouldn't you get better? I think you would.
Absolutely. I can tell you I get better because I listen to every single episode that I push out.
There you go.
As a podcast, right? Just so that I listen for my ums and ahs and know my crutch words such as right and so, and try to eliminate those to make my sound better or give me less editing in the next phase. But still, right? You want to improve. So the only way you can do it is listen to yourself.
Right. And recorded feedback. It's the best, man. And now we've all got it on our phones. We've all got the ability to do it, even with video, right? You can get a lot of recorded feedback really fast.
Very quickly. And, yes, hearing our own voice is annoying, but you get past that, pretty quickly. After you hear the first 4 or 5 times, you're like, okay, that's how I actually sound to the real world. Do I like it? No, I don't. But, oh, well, it is what it is.
Yes, I agree. That's right.
Right? Yeah. And you just move on.
Can I give you my little spiel about your voice? Not your voice, but all of our reactions to hearing ourselves and recorded.
Yeah.
So my spiel is this. Your voice, each of you listening, right? Your voice is the only voice in the universe that you hear inside your body. Your voice doesn't go out into the room and then like zip around into your ears and then you hear it that way. You hear it in your facial mask and your sinuses and your cavities in your chest. If you put your hand on your chest while you're talking, you can feel it vibrate. That's how you feel your voice. So then when you lay it down as external input only, meaning you record it and then play it back, it's not that we hate it. It's that we don't recognize it. It's like, that's not my voice. Well, no, that's right. It's not, because now you're hearing it like everybody else on the planet hears your voice, as external stimulus only. And so we just have a disconnection. And I think that a lot of times can help people get over it faster and kind of go, oh, yeah, that's exactly what you said. It's like, it just is what it is. That's how everybody else hears me. It doesn't connect to me, but let's move on.
Yeah, I like the way you put that. It goes back to the whole, boomeranging back. It goes to that whole perception thing of how, right? It's
yes.
like, that's just how I perceive the world, etc. And how
Good
I perceive me to the world. What I wanted to touch at was, do you think leaders should have back pocket stories? Stories that they have in their back pocket, they've worked on for a while, that they can pull out in certain situations that, pop up from time to time? Or do you think it's better that they would, see a situation and then find a story that kind of fits that situation more so than having one already good to go?
I think back pocket stories are great. I think they have a liability attached to them, but I think they're great. Like, by the way, that sock puppet story that I told for years and years and years, oh my gosh, I had that ready to go. Literally, all I had to hear was the word nervousness, and I was like ready to tell that story. I think the liability that gets attached to back pocket stories is repetition. I think, I'll give you an example. I had a general manager who literally went around the world to different plants and factories and met with people and had all hands meetings, and he told the same story pretty much all the time. And by the way, it was a great story. The problem was when he was in year 2, he was still telling the same story. And so people were like, well, we've heard this story. He told that story last year. Now it's a problem. Now look, the people who are his insiders who traveled with him, they understood. It's like being on the stump with a politician. You're going to hear the basic same speech every time, but it's not for the insiders. It's not for the people who travel with you. It's for all the people who were there just that night, right? And so I think that's okay. But I do think you need to be careful that if you're overusing the story or telling the same audience the same story that you told last time, then I think people can get a little cynical and you need to find a new story.
And so outside of getting a new story, obviously you do need to have more than one story for, plethora of different situations. But what are some mitigation strategies to ensure that you don't keep pulling out that story 3, that fits this, all the above scenarios all the time?
Well, I guess what's going to help is if you really actually have more stories available to you.
Yeah, for sure.
And again, I think you can find stories any number of places. Listen to the people who speak in public for a living. Politicians, chief officers, senior leaders who are talking all the time. Often they will tell you a story that they heard from someone else. I was talking to a woman in our Akron plant, and she stopped me in the hallway. She said something so important to me, right? Now, I'm not telling you something that happened to me, really. I'm telling you a story that happened to this woman. So I think if you're listening all the time and getting them, you should be collecting your stories. And I just want to go back to something I said, which is if you're doing that 5-minute exercise on the drive home, it starts your magnet working where you're now going to click into stories. Like I'm going to have an exchange with you and go, oh man, there was a story in that. Oh man, that luncheon, there was a story in that. And I just want to say, I'm always listening for stories all the time because it's how my brain works. And I've taught myself to listen for them because they're so helpful.
Yeah. I think also if we, empower our people to let us know. So just like you said with that manager, if the traveling road crew that was with him, listen to him say that same story again, see the reaction of the crowd going, here we go again. Afterwards, go, hey, boss, you said that story like 50 times now. You said that one here last year. You might want to change it up for the next stop, right?
You would hope, right? You would hope. I agree.
It's all about empowering your people and making that climate of openness and not being scared of bringing these issues forward, especially if something so direct to their boss.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
This show definitely took a turn where I didn't expect it to go. We completely just talked about storytelling the whole time. And I must say, Tom, it's been awesome. And I don't want to end it, but I feel like, you know what, it's time to slowly switch gears and head towards the end of the episode. But before we close out here, I got a couple last questions for you.
Sure.
The last one, second last one, is a question I ask all my guests here at Moving Forward Leadership. And that is, according to you, Tom Henschel, what makes a great leader?
I think great leaders listen, and I think great leaders set vision. So I think those two things are critically important. They're not the only things that leaders do. Certainly leaders need to be able to manage and keep track and hold people accountable and do all kinds of things with their teams. But I think this idea of listening so that you really know what's going on, and this idea of setting vision for where we're headed to, and I think those are two core skills for leaders.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree with you more. Final thing is, how can people find you? How can they follow you? Feel free to talk about your podcast. Feel free to give yourself a shameless plug. It's all about you right now.
Thanks. So the name of my podcast is The Look and Sound of Leadership. I've been podcasting since 2008, so it's been around a long time. You can find it on any podcast app. My company is called Essential Communications, and our website is essentialcomm.com. It's essentialcomm with 2 M's.com, and there's a free archive there where you can get all the past episodes and find links to different shows, and there's lots of free resources for you at essentialcomm.com.
Awesome. For the audience, as always, it's easy for you. Just go to movingforwardleadership.com/111, and all links are there in the show notes for you already. Tom, it's been an honor. It's been a pleasure to have you on the show. I feel like I need to get you back again sometime because we didn't even touch coaching, which is really what I wanted to talk about.
Great. Another episode. We'll do it again.
But seriously, it's always great to have a fellow podcaster and thought leader in the leadership realm on the show with me.
Which is why I was looking forward to being with you today. So thanks a million.
All right, that's all I got for you fine folks today. I hope you enjoyed the show. I hope you enjoyed the interview. And most importantly, I hope you got something out of it. And if you did, remember R², S², right? Rate and review the show so that it gets a little bit noticed, a bit more. But most importantly, I can help more people because that's what I'm here for. That's what my guests are here for, is to help more people become better leaders and not being bosses, right? So remember that. R², rate and review. S, share the show. Share this show with someone who you think can relate to the podcast as a whole and today's topic. And then finally, subscribe. Subscribe so that you never miss another episode. And you can do that via your podcast playing app of choice through movingforwardleadership.com/subscribe. That's it for today, ladies and gentlemen. And as always, stop bossing and start leading. Take care now.